You know what time it is. It is time for my top waiver wire stashes ahead of week 8. And this is going to be a fun one because one, we are getting more and more NFL trade rumors, so I am including guys who could benefit from those potential trades. And two, week 8 has 6 teams on a bye. It is going to be chaos making waiver wire claims for desperation spot starts. So as always, you know the drill. Our goal here is to get ahead of the game and get a jump start on your league mates. We are predicting players who could be the top waiver wire ads on Tuesday and snagging them now for free so that you don't have to spend your FAAB or waiver priority. This is the video of videos that you need. And let's spice things up a bit here and talk about the guys who will benefit from potential trades first. While Jakobi Meyers asked for a trade this offseason and now he's on the trade block, enter Bech. Bech's snaps have gone up significantly over the past 2 weeks. Unfortunately, it hasn't resulted in any promising fantasy production, but in his defense, that might just be Geno Smith. But despite the Raiders looking objectively awful, Jakobi Meyers seems like an actual legitimate trade candidate and not some just random speculation of what NFL analysts would like to see happen. Because, as I mentioned, Meyers literally asked to get traded this offseason. He was frustrated with his contract, and it's understandable. He's in the final year of his contract. That was a 3-year, $33 million contract, which was definitely a steal for any team looking for a cheap wide receiver, too. That does make him a very appealing trade candidate. Bech would be primed to take on his role. Bech was very uninvolved in the offense earlier in the season, and I talked about this in the offseason quite a bit. While I like him a lot, and Bech had a fairly high draft pick that should logically make him in contention to be a starter, unfortunately, his skill set did directly conflict with Jakobi Meyers because Bech is a slot receiver. So the Raiders haven't been able to use him because that's what Jakobi Meyers does. They were likely moving on from Meyers next year. This just allows them to get something out of it. Now, Meyers' production has been subpar since week 1, but it's possible that Bech has success here. He is worth an ad to find out. Breece Hall has been a very popular trade candidate for a while here, and now the Jets are at 0-6 and Garrett Wilson is injured and multiple teams are looking for a lead back. It's looking like this trade could actually come to fruition. If Breece Hall is traded, Isaiah Davis is the new RB1. The Jets' offense has been rough, but Hall has had success on the ground, and Davis could have success as well. 2 of Hall's games resulted in just 5 fantasy points, but the other 4 have been between 9 and 17 fantasy points despite not having a single touchdown. As long as the matchup is good enough, the Jets' run blocking is good enough to provide volume, and if the game gets out of hand, Fields has no problem checking down. Now, Isaiah Davis is definitely more of a power back, but he is a very capable receiver, and more than anything, he would have the backfield on lock with no competition. Davis hasn't played that much this season, but he looked fantastic in 2024. He is absolutely worth a stash. Mark Andrews is on the trade block, and we know exactly who would likely step up here. Isaiah likely. Investing in the Ravens might seem pointless, but I do genuinely believe that the Ravens will turn things around after the bye week, at least from a fantasy perspective. Their defense is definitely cooked, but the offense is definitely not a lost cause. The first 4 weeks with Lamar Jackson were rough, but they were difficult defensive matchups. They were fine in week 1 against Buffalo. After that, they faced Cleveland, Detroit, and Kansas City. Those can be very rough matchups. After the Ravens bye, they face Chicago, Miami, 2 of the best matchups that you can ask for, the perfect get-right games, followed by a very reasonable matchup against Minnesota, then a couple of tough matchups against Cleveland and the Jets, and then they're back to better matchups there. When we talk about the Raiders and the Jets trading players, it is because they likely realize that things have gone very sideways and the season is not going to be a competitive one. The Ravens will still be operating as though they are fighting for a playoff spot, so you might be wondering why they would trade Mark Andrews. Well, it has long been speculated that the Ravens would simply move on from Mark Andrews once his contract is up because they have Isaiah Likely. This is the final year of his contract. Mark Andrews has looked very, very mediocre, unfortunately. If they can manage to get something out of him in a trade, it makes logical sense that Andrews would be on the table. Likely has shown upside, but the majority of his success has come when Mark Andrews was out. While Andrews hasn't been successful this year, if he's out, Likely does have weekly tight end 1 upside. Now, before we move on to the regular stashes that are not related to trades, we do have to talk about Kendre Miller and Alvin Kamara real quick. Alvin Kamara flat out said that if he gets traded, he will be somewhere sipping pina coladas. Now, to threaten retirement upon trade is kind of crazy, but I guess that's one way to put your foot down and essentially refuse a trade even though you do not have a no trade clause. So technically speaking, It's literally not his decision, but that type of talk should be more than enough to make any team think twice about trading for him. So while we do still like Kendre Miller, he theoretically no longer qualifies for the trade benefit category. Jalen Coker is officially active for week 7. Why wait and see if he has a strong game? Just grab him now for free. We literally talked about this over and over again because I love Jalen Coker. This isn't the first time I've talked about him as a stash. If you are concerned about the fact that Carolina is a subpar offense, don't be. Bryce Young isn't pushing aggressive volume, clearly, but the Panthers have been successful on the ground, which means that they do move the ball well, and they are progressing in a positive direction. The Panthers have a fairly good strength of schedule rest of season and a pass-friendly-ish playoff schedule, and we've seen Coker's success despite the Panthers being bad last year. Last year, he had 4 double-digit fantasy point performances on just 11 active games. And some of those games, like half of those games, were actually on limited snaps because he hadn't been a full-time starter at that point. This week's matchup is against a Jets defense that definitely leans far tougher on the wide receiver ones. Multiple secondary options have had strong games against them. And when I say secondary, I might even be overselling that. The Jets matchup for Dallas was the game that Ryan Flournoy went off. So take that for what it's worth. Coker has real potential here. He is fully healthy. He is expected to play a full complement of snaps. He is set to take the starting slot receiver role here. Even if he doesn't have a big game, there are good things on the horizon here. I'm honestly surprised Tyjae Spears isn't higher rostered. Before his preseason injury, he was a very popular candidate to offer true late round value in fantasy drafts and be less of a handcuff and more of a 1B to Tony Pollard, particularly because while both backs are strong receivers, the Titans were leaning more heavily on Spears from a passing perspective in 2024. And there were multiple occasions where Spears outperformed Tony Pollard. And in just his second game back this season, that is exactly what happened. In week 6, Spears outsnapped Pollard. Spears played 36 snaps compared to just 26 by Pollard. And what makes this production very sticky here is that, again, Spears likely gets the edge here when the Titans are playing from behind, and the Titans are going to be playing from behind a lot because they are bad. Spears offers real standalone value here. But there's another caveat as well. The Titans fired head coach Brian Callahan, and while that is definitely not going to inspire any drastic change, that can affect how they approach this timeshare. If they feel Spears offers more of a pop to the offense, they could be more inclined to tilt snaps more his direction, especially because Tony Pollard's contract actually makes him a very easy cut candidate in the offseason with very little financial loss. Keep that in mind. While we are still waiting for the official word on Mike Evans' availability for this week, if Evans is out, that obviously puts Tez Johnson in a big increased position to operate as the wide receiver 1, but there's still value here even if Evans plays. Emeka Egbuka is out with a hamstring injury, and he didn't appear to be close this week, and he didn't practice. I would expect him to potentially miss week 8, a week 8 matchup that is very, very friendly against New Orleans. Chris Godwin was ruled out very early this week. We have no timeline on him. This seems like it is trending towards a multi-week injury. Sterling Shepard was operating as the wide receiver 3 behind Mike Evans and Emeka Egbuka, but the snaps seem to be shifting to a much more younger and speedier Tez Johnson. Johnson had the most snaps between all the receivers last week, and he had a big touchdown. We know he's talented. He's an interesting ad for fantasy managers in deeper leagues. From practice squad to waiver wire stash, hello, Lil'Jordan Humphrey. If you are not familiar with Lil'Jordan Humphrey's game, I will let you know. First of all, his name is not actually descriptive like at all. He is not little. He is literally 6'4", 225, and that is his birth name. Ironic. And that is why he ascended into an immediate critical role for the Giants. They need a big-bodied receiver. Wan'Dale Robinson is a small slot receiver. I love him, but he is tiny. Jalen Hyatt, very, very skinny. Humphrey fills a very specific need. So while it might feel uncomfortable to add a guy who literally had no role prior to last week and is actually in his 7th year in the NFL and has not had a single ounce of success, the fact that they need somebody to fill a role left behind by Malik Neighbors, that is at least encouraging here. Humphrey is not Malik Neighbors or anything close to it, but he does have flex value if he retains this specific role that he had in week 6. Humphrey had a whopping 17.4 ADOT in week 6. That is right on line with where Malik Neighbors was. You know the drill with Kayshon Boutte. We will keep this one short and sweet. Stefon Diggs had a down week, but I do expect him to bounce back. This is less about Stefon Diggs and more about Drake Maye. Whereas other second-year quarterbacks are having regressions and struggling to put up the same numbers they did in 2024, Drake Maye is ascending. We could truly be watching the growth of a young quarterback into one of the elite quarterbacks in the league. Am I being a bit hyperbolic? Slightly, yes. But honestly, he truly does look incredible, and he is delivering on exactly what we were promised. Maye has 10 touchdowns on the season with just 2 interceptions, and I think there is a higher ceiling to reach here. As Maye continues to increase and improve and increase volume, we're going to get to a point where there are multiple viable receivers in this offense, and Kayshon Boutte will be one of them. This stash is pretty straightforward. Kyle Monangai is the direct handcuff to DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is dealing with an injury. Swift is expected to play, but we have been through this before. We are true to this. We are not new to this. It is never a bad idea if you have the space on your bench to stash the handcuff to a guy who is dealing with an injury, because one of 2 things can happen. 1, Swift wakes up tomorrow morning and the injury is worse and he can't go. And that is exactly what happened before with Kenneth Gainwell and Jalen Warren. And Gainwell that week was one of my top waiver wire stashes, and we won on that one. Or scenario 2, Swift plays through the injury and ends up making it worse, and you've already got Kyle Monangai for next week. At this point, we don't have any information on a timeline for Bucky Irving. Logically, they didn't put him on IR, so you would think that the timeline would be less than 4 weeks, but the Bucs have been a little bit dodgy when it comes to injuries this season. Chris Godwin had a whole second surgery, and we had no clue. And it's not as if we haven't seen running backs in general not go on IR, but then not actually come back in the season. Y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. Sean Tucker had a very solid week 6 performance, 6 carries, 25 yards, and a touchdown. It's not much, but we know that he is an adequate handcuff with big upside. We've seen it before. And we know also that the weapons are continuing to dwindle down, and that might mean that the Bucs have to get different in terms of how they deploy those weapons. If Bucky Irving's injury continues to linger, Sean Tucker could have some standalone value with Rachaad White. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can also find me across all social media platforms at It's Terra Time, so make sure that you are tuned in because I am bringing you more fantasy football content all season long. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications because every week I've got you covered with top waiver wire ads, live shows, live Q&A where you can ask me any question that you have, and so much more.